Hello there and welcome along to the RTÉ Rugby podcast. I'm Neil Treacy. I'm joined this week by Bernard Jackman and Johnny Murphy. We will be picking apart the bones of the Investec Champions Cup final defeat for Leinster, another final defeat for Leinster, and we'll answer the big question of the week: just how great is Antoine Dupont? After all of that, we still have the final round of the regular season in the URC to dig through. Playoff games coming up then next week as well, and also this week, just a lot of news around retirements and transfers to get through. So with a lot to work our way through, we may as well dive right into it. Toulouse 31, Leinster 22 after extra time at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in the Investec Champions Cup final. One of the great Champions Cup finals and one of the great trialist games I think we've probably seen in the last few years. Fellas, we might start where it went wrong for Leinster. Jackman was doing media yesterday, and I asked him, what has the review thrown up? And basically said it was three things. The first one, the breakdown, where probably throughout the second half in particular and in extra time, they got cleaned out. Jack Willis and Dupont in particular were doing untold damage. Their protection of the ball when they got into the 22 and the silly turnovers and handling errors they were making. And then the third one, Birch, is the obvious that they lost, is what the review threw up. But I suppose that those two, the protection of the ball and the breakdown, were the bits that just really, really jumped out, that were so alien to what we're used to seeing with Leinster.
Yeah, and Ireland, to be fair, and Ireland, and it just shows you. The Joe Schmidt used to say that the breakdown is the heartbeat of your team, and it was. And the problem is when you start to get scared that you're not as secure to breakdown as you want, it actually affects the next phase, because people are in two minds whether they go and hit that ruck or not, and so your shape on the next phase isn't as good either. And then obviously the fact that Leinster were actually losing the ball, whether it's through a strip, whether it's through a barge, or whether it was through a jackal, and it became a massive issue for them. And poor old Jemison Gibson Park, he had no opportunity to play on the front foot really. Sorry, he had limited opportunities. I agree with Nina Barr. Leinster did have some good attack, but it was mainly when they were direct. And the issue for them was once Toulouse managed to, I suppose, stop that. Okay, they soaked a few tackles, but because they got after the breakdown, then Leinster just didn't have the skill execution or the shape on the day to get the ball to wit well, And I thought in the first half Leinster's handling was so off, but it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't as noticeable because the ball, they very rarely knocked it on. There wasn't that many scrums from
knockbacks.
Yeah, the balls went back, and then it was just. But the whole opportunity and momentum was gone, and Toulouse reorganized the defensive line. So, look, the problem is we probably should have seen it. I thought they had so much possession against Northampton for the first 50 minutes that game should have been dead and buried, but their attack just wasn't as fluid as it should be or has been in the past. Other times this year, they've been very defense kicking game focused, and they were the two areas that worked for them. But having said that, when they look back at it, they would have seen some 3 or 4 glaring try scoring opportunities that they blew. But that is your attack, so you have to, it's all well and good creating it, but the good attacks finish it. And I thought Toulouse's attack was exceptional off less ball. They stretched Leinster like they haven't been stretched for a long time. And okay, Leinster scrambled really well to manage to keep them scoreless. But I felt every time Toulouse had the ball, they were putting doubt in Leinster's mind, where it was kind of the opposite. Every time Leinster had the ball, Toulouse were getting energy, because at the end they were getting the ball back. So very, very impressive. Even if Toulouse had lost the game, I think I would have left London more in awe than I was going in. I just thought they showed incredible character and skill.
Mm-hmm.
Birch, did you say that there was I think on TV, did you say that there was a lot of drop balls in the warm-up?
Yeah, there was. They just looked really anxious and nervous. Like, it was a really poor warm-up, because I watch Leinster's warm-up every time I do them on TV, because not that I want to, not that I feel it's always a factor, but it's usually really slick, and just it wasn't. It wasn't at all. And look, there has to be pressure on them. There has to be stress from previous finals. Like, it's amazing. Like, when you think that first generation, the lads who played in 2009 and went on to play into 2015-16, like they won their first 5 finals, and if you include the Challenge Cup final, they won their first 5, and they would have gone into 4 and 5 thinking, right, finals are where we come into our own. And now they've obviously lost, was it 4? 4 in a row. 4 consecutive finals, but obviously there was a semi-final in between. And again, that builds, and then what the team you're facing probably are capable of doing something to you. It hasn't been done to you for a while. A very different threat to La Rochelle. Not better, but just different. And it just seemed. And like the crazy thing is, I think a lot of Leinster players played quite well. Like Porter had an exceptional performance. Doris had some big moments, but just on the day, they just couldn't get it done.
And Johnny, like I think there was almost like a catch-22 in there for Leinster as well. And on the few occasions where they actually made good line breaks from further out in the pitch and got their way up towards the 22, that's actually where Toulouse ended up being their most dangerous at the breakdown, where there was one in the first half where Robbie Henshaw goes straight up through the guts of the Toulouse defence. I think it was off a midfield scrum. If they were playing a penalty advantage off a scrum out by the halfway line, Henshaw makes a big break towards the 22. They move it back in field, and it's Henshaw then on his second carry, who he ends up being a little bit isolated, and that's when someone like Dupont gets in. I can't remember who it was, gets in over and forces the turnover. Similar then when Dan Sheehan makes the break, after picking off Dupont, he gets back and he gets tackled by Blair Kinghorn, and Dupont comes in and steals the ball again. Ronan Keller down in towards the last 10 minutes or so made some decent yards down towards the right touchline. So it was these instances where when they actually did breach the Toulouse defensive line and get into space, that's where Toulouse found the opportunity to go after the breakdown a little bit more. And I don't know, I on reflection, then you can kind of see why Leinster maybe clammed up a little bit in attack.
Yeah, and then you have another one like there's 3. You have another one where James Lowe after where he threw an intercept on the back end side where he's at 10, he offloaded on the inside, and that actually led to a period of a kind of a big break from Toulouse. So like there's 4 clear cut proper opportunities to build pressure, and a lot of those turnovers, are within the 15-meter, where if they had held the ball and they got a penalty, they probably would go to sticks, or potentially if it's on the 5-meter, go to one of their tap and go plays. It was just, they just lacked that killer instinct. And even the thing for me was, even at the end when they got the drop goal opportunity again, it was just that tiny, they were half a meter off, in their passing. They were sticking people on their back shoulder. They're throwing the ball in behind their offloads. Like, how often this year have we seen where they make a first phase break, James Lowe goes through and he just pops a ball into Gibson Park's breadbasket and he's in underneath the posts? Like, that didn't stick. It was those clear cut chance. There's 5. They get one of those. Like a 0% return rate in those is just not good enough in the final. And even all that, they still had their opportunity in the last 30 seconds to go and win the game. And then even at halftime, you think, in extra time, you think, right, this 14 men, 10 minutes, how long it's gone on for, they're going to do it. But for me, I think their fatigue and I think the anxiety that Birch spoke about and that he potentially saw in the warm-up really came through in the last 10 minutes. Like Doris's penalty, which was a big sway, like he's on his knees there. That strikes as someone that's really tired and like, oh, we need the ball back and I might get away with it, rather than just being disciplined and holding your tie. I think that's where the fatigue and the stress and the anxiety really showed in the last kind of 10 minutes of extra time.
I'm glad we kind of started out talking about this side of why they lost, where the specific areas, because it did become in the last couple of days a little bit too much of the analysis by hindsight of, well, Toulouse kicked their penalties when they got the opportunities and they won the game. Leinster went to the corner with their penalty opportunities and they lost the game. Ergo, going to the corner is the wrong thing to do because you lost. And Jack Nienaber was fairly strong on that yesterday when he was asked about it. With the benefit of hindsight, should you have taken more safe options? And he brought up the 2022 final when Leinster only took shots at goal against La Rochelle and they didn't go for the corner, and they were criticised afterwards for not being adventurous enough and not going in for the kill when they had the opportunities. So the balance, Johnny, is very, very difficult to strike, and ultimately it's outcome driven. If you win, you took the right options, and if you lost, you took the wrong options.
Yeah, and it's very hard to. Again, it just comes down to execution and that opportunity to pull the trigger. And we spoke last week. We thought this was going to be a final where you had to score tries. Everyone was saying that beforehand. We said last week Toulouse have 10 minutes where they could score 28 points. You have to manage that, and that was their instinct, that we're going to score. That's what we're going to do. And we have to, because Toulouse are going to have their period of 10, 15 minutes dominance. We need to make sure that they only get a try, 2 tries in that 10 minutes. So we're going to have to go and get 2 or 3 in our period of dominance. And that's what everyone was saying. So it's hindsight is 2020 vision. It's one of those things that you just don't know. You're right or you're wrong after the fact.
Can I come in on that, Neil? So I think I agree that they weren't all gimmies, whatever. But Blair Kinghorn's first kick wasn't a gimme either. It was. I think there was definitely a strategy difference in both teams, which is fine. That's what makes it interesting. So Toulouse obviously had a policy that they were going to kick their points. Leinster had a policy that they were going to go to the corner. I know they're saying where the kicks were influenced that a little bit, but I do think Leinster wanted to go to the corner, and I do think the review to 2022, as you say, was that we punished La Rochelle for penalties given away in the first half with 3 points when that wasn't enough. Now I think the difference this year is Leinster's defense is much better, right? So maybe you don't like. It's mind-boggling to think that you keep Toulouse to 15 points and you don't beat them because they're the best attacking team in the competition, and they're a better attacking team than Leinster. They've shown that this year. So your defense works, but you don't have enough points on the other side of it. But I find it really interesting. I don't have a massive issue with him kicking to the corner. But my question is, if you look at the data, right? So basically, Leinster went after him in the maul, and Toulouse conceded the second least amount of maul tries in the top 14, two all season. Right now, the top 14 is a maul and brawl competition.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You get tested in the maul in the top 14 every week because that's what the crap teams do. Like I was in Grenoble. I mean, when we wanted to beat Toulouse, we didn't try and outrun them. We mauled them and scrummed them and went to the air and made it a battle and kicked their penalties, kicked their drop goals, etc. Right? And that Toulouse team, historically, actually, that was a weakness for them, right? Because they were so built around Jouet. But this Toulouse pack have conceded the second least maul tries, and actually are top in terms of maul meters conceded. So there's no doubt that the data tells you and the evidence tells you, and Saturday reinforced it even more, that they can defend mauls, right? But then on the opposite side of the thing, Leinster the third lowest maul meters in the URC, which is an easy competition to maul in because it's not something that the URC teams really go after. And Leinster's pack are as big. I know when Leinster put their best team out, which you don't do that often in the URC, but they have the muscle to basically maul teams, right? So it's not something that Leinster are particularly good at or do very often. And they decided that was the way. That was what they wanted to do, and it wasn't just once; it was twice, it was 3 times. So, and the problem is with the maul is that when you don't score from it, and Leinster were adding their backs to it, and in fairness, at times it looked like they were getting momentum. Like it's people say it's hindsight, but hindsight isn't the stats going into the game. Hindsight is the plan you made based on the evidence you see. And that's what I find interesting. And then like also the other thing is, if you kick to the corner, okay, maul them first. But Leinster are probably the most dangerous team in breakout plays, like quick breakouts from a mini maul, a fake maul, and using the athleticism of Doris, James Lowe into that pocket. Dan Sheehan, obviously, anyone, Josh Van der Fleer does it a lot. Like, and if you do that against Toulouse, and the way Toulouse defend with their hooker, who actually attacks that maul defense quite quickly, I actually think you can nearly score a first phase there, if you run it well. But they're the things I think that are as interesting as, do I take my points? Do I take shots at goal from everywhere?
Yeah.
I think that's the decision every team will make. But my question is that I think, obviously we're not going to get the answer to it, but that's where I see the potential discrepancy is, that they wanted to go after Toulouse at the maul, when Leinster's strength is actually playing away from the maul, and Toulouse's strength is the maul defense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually brought up that maul stuff then, because that was I kind of wanted to go down this path of not even so much should they have kicked or should they have gone to the corner, but now that they've made the decision to go to the corner, what did they actually do with the ball when they got down there?
Yeah.
And why didn't they score tries? So I wrote about this on Sunday for Monday. So they had 8 lineouts over the course of the 100 minutes, 8 lineouts in the Toulouse 22. One of those it was a bad underthrow from Dan Sheehan, and it got taken back on the Toulouse side. One of those was I can't remember which was the Leinster jumper in the lineup, but he only just about got a hand to it to flick it back. So 6 of those 8 lineouts were caught clean by Leinster, and they looked to maul on all 6 of those. On the one occasion where they actually didn't get the maul set up right, I think it was Emmanuel Meafu just about was sacking James Ryan as they were looking to set up the maul. That's the moment in the game. It's the one moment in the game where Josh Van der Fleer breaks out, having gone in to set up the maul initially, breaks out, gets 10-15 yards through the 2022. Caelan Doris comes in and makes another hard carry, and a couple of phases later, Van der Fleer is over to score their try. So the 5 occasions where they actually got their maul set up and moving, it amounted to nothing. And there was another part you mentioned there as well, where on a few of those mauls where they had the backs coming in to help out. And when I was looking back at it, it did get me thinking on those mauls where the backs did come in to help out. Leinster were moving quite well up until that point. And I don't know what you think, or if you noticed it at the time, but I felt that once those extra players were coming in, that's when things started to get really, really messy, because the ball was getting trapped inside there. They weren't shifting the ball to the back, or they weren't getting, we'll say, just say, for example, it was Josh Van der Fleer who was in there with the ball when those players were coming in as reinforcements. They were keeping that man in there, and Toulouse were just trapping them up and making it messy, and probably in some cases a little bit illegally so, but they were riding the referee the right way. And, you could say as well, when Leinster moving those players in, that's illegal anyway, because they weren't, shifting the player back along or shifting the ball back with it. I don't know what you think. I just thought that Leinster were making the mauls a little bit messier than they had to be.
Yeah, I think, again, look, they probably felt, they saw that forward momentum, and they probably thought, look, we'll add our ballast to this and it'll score. But the problem is, when you don't score from there, then the whole thing is dead. And you actually allow Toulouse add more bodies to, and this sounds silly, whatever, but it actually becomes harder to referee, because there's so many bodies in there.
How can you spot an in the side? How can you spot a change of a bind?
100%. And that was what effectively happened. It was that Toulouse players were able to get through those little seams and affect the ball. And like, look, in general, I can see why they went in. I can see why they went in, because they thought they were just finishing it off. But then when you don't do it accurately, but it's like, as I said, it comes from what you do all year. Like Leinster defended well all year. I think Leinster kicked well all year. That's what they've been focusing on. Those parts of the game worked. The maul hasn't been statistically an area that's been strong for them. And it didn't work on a day. Now, look, I think also pressure can actually make you be more conservative as well. And the pressure that you have on yourself. And look, it's not, and look, you could make the other argument that because they were getting done at the breakdown, most of those mauls, a lot of mauls happened early in the game before the breakdown was a real factor. But you could say because they were starting to lose ball at the breakdown, they didn't want to go there. They didn't want to go away from an area where they probably felt like, I think if I was in that maul, I probably would have felt one more and we'll get them as well. You know what I mean? Because there was moments where you nearly had them. Like that's the frustrating thing for Leinster is they did, as you say, they didn't look like they were on the verge of actually breaking away or mauling him over. But fair play to Toulouse. I mean, they managed to stop those threats incredibly well. And it was an amazing defensive performance by Toulouse. Like it really was. Despite Leinster's inaccuracies, like if you include how they brought they nearly as much line speed as Leinster. You know what I mean? They nearly as much line speed as Leinster. They tested Leinster's skills. They attacked the ball in the tackle. They charged the rooks, like as I said, and Leinster just couldn't get comfortable in any way. They looked a little bit better when Frawley came on and probed down the blind side, etc. But they just didn't look comfortable.
I might move it on to talk about Toulouse themselves and specifically Johnny Antoine Dupont, because we haven't really mentioned him too much so far today, and I think it needs to be mentioned. Probably just needs to be mentioned as well from a Leinster point of view, where like we're trying to dissect why they lost the final, and I think one thing that jumps out is that probably the greatest player of all time had his greatest game of his career, in the Champions Cup final. That's a pretty important thing to get right in a final.
Yeah, and I think it was probably one of his best defensive displays. And he was like an extra back row. Any opportunity he got to get in over the ball, slow it down. He obviously had those pivotal turnovers at those times, but he also he was just everywhere, and little things like for their try, he was actually there on the inside. If the winger gets tackled, he's there to get that offload. His work rate was unbelievable. He's a generational player that I think when it really mattered, he grabbed the ball. He grabbed the game by the horns. Like, he was just incredible. And I think that moment for the turnover where he gives to where he throws the intercept back into Sheehan to get back there. Like, Sheehan's quick, but for him to get on the ball, and he was one of the leaders in terms of playing the referee on the right side, pushing the limits as best he could. Like, you could argue there on the Carley thing, who generally I thought was actually quite good, but there was a couple of moments where that he penalises Leinster later on in the game for someone being pulled over the ball and losing their feet in that position. That actually happened at that turnover where he gets in instantly. He gives it a penalty for Dupont where it could have easily gone the other way, where he's judged to not be holding his body weight because he's pulled back over the ball. So it was, he played on the line and got those really, really important calls. But he is definitely up there as one of the best. He's in the conversation. Very hard to do between different eras and all that, but I think of this generation, he is up there as the best player in the last 5 to 10 years, maybe 15 years. He's just incredible. You think about just like, he could potentially get an Olympic medal. Not that Birch wants to hear that. Could potentially get a medal at the end of the year. That just shows you how adaptable he is in terms of and it's two completely different games, different fitness. He's clicking in there now straight away for the whole summer. Like that, I think that just is a testament to just show how good he is and how versatile his overall skill set is.
Yeah, I would have always hated the who's the best ever arguments up until quite recently. But Birch, I struggle to believe that there has been a player before my lifetime who's better than what Dupont is now. I know I've heard what you've had to say about it over the last couple of days. It's been all over the internet. Like, you absolutely think he's the best ever as well, yes?
yeah, because like he does things that other people can't do, and he's a real. And what I admire most about him is he's an absolute competitor, and I just thought single-handedly he refused to allow Toulouse lose that game. And I know it was inches from being a loss, but like I don't think he could have had any regrets. And I think when you think about how like we were devastated to be knocked out of the World Cup at the quarterfinal, but like he felt and he would have felt that was his destiny to lead France to a home World Cup, like some of the soccer players have done in the past who he's quite close to, and that devastation, and then he throws them into sevens and he resets his goals to like the rumor was he wasn't going to play rugby union at all this end of the season, back at the start, and everyone was like, oh, that makes it easier, but it was incredible. It was incredible. Like we all both go to lots of games. We've seen lots of games over the years. Very rarely do you walk away. Like I do the same when I see RG Snyman play. I go, wow, he can do things that other people can't. But that was 100 minutes of everything. You know what I mean? That's like, and that's not just like RG Snyman can do everything, massive things as well. But just on the day when his team needed him, he was exceptional. And I don't think some people. I said he's the best player in the world, and some people said, "Oh, he has to win a World Cup." I don't think he can labor that on him because like the World Cup's a team game. I know that on Saturday he made a team game look like he was controlling it to a certain extent, but I think he can be the best player ever without winning the World Cup, because he does it for France in Six Nations. In the World Cup, in fairness, the home World Cup, he was a little bit unfortunate. Obviously, he broke his a bone in his face, but he manned up against South Africa and didn't have a bad game, So no, I think it's pretty clear.
Speaking of sevens, then, Johnny, I don't know why we recorded the podcast last week at the time when we did, because within about 3 hours of myself, you, and Johnny Holland ending our recording, there was about a week's worth of rugby news had emerged in the space of about 3 hours. The main story being Hugo Keenan heading off to play sevens for the summer, which I suppose when you break it down and look through it, it makes plenty of sense. He's obviously going to be missing Ireland's tour of South Africa in the summer as well because of that. So we'll get an opportunity to see, some extra minutes for Kieran Frawley or Jimmy O'Brien or someone like that at fullback for Ireland in the summer. It's a really interesting move for Keenan, and particularly because he would have played a huge part in qualifying them for the previous Olympic Games and obviously didn't get to take part himself.
Yeah, I think it's massive. Look, I think the draw when sevens first became an Olympic sport, it's a massive draw for anyone that's an athlete of any kind. And the opportunity to do that is huge. And as you say, he was very much part of the previous qualification. He went off. He was one of the players that went off, played a couple of years, come back. And it's been a couple of years that have really, really stood to him in terms of his skill set, his engine, everything. And look, I just think the Olympics for anyone in sport, it's a huge opportunity to go be an Olympian, but genuine, like the sevens have they're one of the favorites for a podium finish, and like that gives them, to have on top of everything else, like even look at the golfers and Justin Rose and how he speaks about it. It's massive. And even Rory, like the last Olympics, like I remember him saying, I've never tried so hard to finish third in my life. Like it's just such a draw. And I think it's brilliant to see him, and it's what an opportunity and what an experience for him to go and do. Bert,
you looking forward to having a few coffees with Hugo around the Olympic Village, yeah?
Yeah, hopefully. I think sevens actually starts before the seven starts 2 days before the open ceremony. It's going to be class. I think it's a great thing for him to do. I think it's good for his mind. I know he's come back from an injury there, but in general he plays a hell of a lot of rugby, and it helps Ireland, and it also, to be fair, it helps Farrell find someone who can step in. So it increases Ireland's depth. So I support it, and I also think that sevens players who have done incredibly well without the 15s players, it's more acceptable because obviously he has a background in that, rather
And,
than
and
someone
same with Andrew Smith going back in as
totally,
well, obviously. Yeah.
exactly, they've been there. So and they have to still make the team, the squad, but no, I think it's brilliant for everybody.
The last Leinster point I'll raise before moving on to Connacht, who play them on Friday evening. It would be remiss of us not to give a shout out to Rhys Ruddock, who announced his retirement yesterday. 33 years of age, 228 Leinster appearances, 29 for Ireland, 6 URC titles, 3 Champions Cups, a Challenge Cup. Has captained Leinster countless times, has captained Ireland on a few occasions as well. Ultimately, what a career. And he was someone who just about would have been coming through at Leinster when you were in your final year or so there as well.
Yeah,
He seemed like someone from day one who had his head screwed on, and you knew he was going to have a pretty steady career.
yeah. Actually, someone sent me the team sheet yesterday. His first game was against the Dragons in Newport. And I actually, it was the only time I captained Leinster, but sure, I might as well have let Leo or Rhys captain it because he was way better captain than I was. And I think look at his CV, the list of accolades and what he's achieved is phenomenal. But I actually don't think it does him justice, because he is a player that anybody who's ever played or trained with him or played against him would go to war for. And it's not true speak, it's true, big speeches. He just has this, I don't know what it is. He has an aura about him, a likability, a consistency of effort and honesty. And I think that's an honesty that makes people want to play for him. And he's had a big leadership role. He's captain Ireland. I believe, I think I remember. And just, when he's been one of the really important people in Leinster, who maybe didn't get picked for all the big games recently, but is having an influence there. So he's had a great career. There was talk a year ago he might go back to Wales and finish his career there and play for Wales. But I think his body has let him down, recently, and he can bow out with no regrets. And I think Rhys is one of those players that if you played with him and you meet him in 5 years' time, you'll go out of your way to go and say hello to him, I've never heard anyone have a bad word to say about him, and I think he's a credit to his family and himself.
And
just to pick up on that point, Birch, I was on the Australia tour where he got his first cap. He came in as the Irish 20s captain for the final test in Suncorp.
still only 19 at the time.
Yeah, and just such a nice fella. And I remember, that year, that was my first year back. I was up, Kate, my now wife, we were up in Dublin for a weekend away, and we were just having breakfast somewhere on a Sunday morning. Rhys happened to come in, but he came straight over to me. I didn't play, I only knew him a couple of weeks. Straight over, sat down, we had a coffee. He's just a really, really nice guy. And I think two things that Bert said, just his honesty in terms of what, how he is, really enjoyable company. And when you talk to the people that would have played with him for so long, he was one of those guys in the background that was probably a cultural architect within that really led the culture across the board. Whether he was picked or not picked, he trained in the same fashion. I'm looking forward to seeing what he does in the future over the next kind of over the next year or so, coaching wise. And but yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, and like even on the coaching part, like you mentioned, he's been dipping his toes into bits of coaching over the last few years. He was working with the Leinster under-18s schools. I think last summer he was under-20s coach at Lansdowne last season as well, and he's going straight in with the Lansdowne senior coaching ticket this year as well, Birch. Obviously he's cut from a particular cloth with his father Mike, but he's probably someone who you would have safely said fairly early in his career was going to go down the coaching route. He just probably had that in him, did he?
Yeah, a bit like Sean O'Brien. Like both of them have dipped into it way before their career ends, which is always a really good sign that it's not just a panic decision. And listen to players who've worked under him, they've found him, his level of detail, his expertise, and his way with people have been really positive. So I think he's one to follow. Over the next couple of years and see where he lands.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing it. So that is Rhys Ruddock. Congratulations on the retirement. Could be getting a final run out at the RDS this Friday evening. Leinster taking on Connacht in the final regular season round of the United Rugby Championship. On Connacht, then, it's a tall order for them, Birch, to qualify for the playoffs, let alone Champions Cup. They would need to win, probably with a bonus point on Friday evening. Then they would hope one of Benetton or Edinburgh get 0 points when they meet on Saturday afternoon. They'd need the Stormers to beat the Lions, and that would only be enough to qualify eighth position. And if they want to get Champions Cup, then from eighth position, they would have to go and win the URC outright. So it's probably not even worth talking about that, but it's probably just worth talking about what they can do this Friday night and what they can put into this game and what they can get out of it, so that at the very least, even if the season does end on Friday evening, they can kind of parcel the season up on a positive note. How can they go about doing it?
I think if they ended up bringing Sam Prendergast back in the bus with them, they'd be happy. No, like this week it's obviously, it all depends on Leinster. It all depends on Leinster if there's a reaction that Leo Cullen will want, if the players can deal with that disappointment and finish the regular season with a big performance. I think it's going to be very hard for Connacht. It's always hard when you don't have a huge amount to play for bar pride. Like even last weekend or 2 weeks ago in Stormers, they still mathematically had a chance. It was their last home game of the season. They were saying goodbye to 11 players, and that generally gets an emotional performance, and they did play quite well actually. But this is harder now. They've had no game at the weekend. It's very easy to slip into holiday mode, and some teams don't. Some teams can just go and do it and be really professional. But I would say it's very hard to fancy them, to be fair. It's very hard to fancy them unless Leinster just don't pitch. Having said that, some areas of their attack has been really good, but unfortunately just not clinical. Not clinical in at key moments is killing them, and I'd say they're finding it hard to have a lot of confidence coming to Dublin, so it'll be tough for them.
And then throw in on top of it as well, like the continued delay of getting Mack Hansen back fit, Johnny, has just been really, really frustrating. And you reckon if things had gone on time, they might have had a good crack of being in this top eight, but he didn't make it back for the Munster game, which is what they penciled in initially. And then the Stormers game came a week too early. We're now 2 weeks further down the line, and he's not going to be fit for the game against Leinster on Friday night. From an Irish point of view, with Mack Hansen, would you have concerns about bringing him on a big tour of South Africa over the summer if he hasn't, like, he more than likely won't have played a game for 6 months, 7 months by the time Ireland take on South Africa in their first test in Pretoria?
I think if you take a longer term view on this, is it worth just giving him a break, having a full pre-season, being fully right, coming into, going down what's going to be an incredible tour down there? It'll take him, game wise, it generally take you kind of 2.5, 3 games to get up to full speed anyway. So is it worth that? As I say, he could have had, there was hope that he'd have a 3-game potential, and even if they got into the playoffs, maybe 4 or 5 game lead into the tour. I think just with Keenan and going on the sevens, and this, it gives them an opportunity to broaden their net, give guys more game time, and build a greater squad. And they're going to need it again. They're going into a Lions year. Mack Hansen would be in that conversation from a Lions perspective if we pick back up from a form on previous form, particularly World Cup form. So you're going to have to be looking elsewhere anyway for a summer tour and building that up after. So for me, if he's not right for this weekend, then better off just kind of letting him take another couple of months, get completely refreshed, and then give it a last from kind of next September on.
What do you think of that, Bernard?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's the right option. It's the right option. Obviously, just I don't think there's any need for him to risk it this week. He's not 100% right. Obviously, he's a key man for Connacht next year. He's a key man for Ireland. So they have some good youngsters. It's an opportunity to see what they've gone down a route where they're promoting a lot of very young talent next year and cutting back on experience. So a taste of what it's like to play against Leinster or any of those top teams, Stormers last week, is will benefit them at the start of next season.
Yeah, I'm looking forward as well to getting another look at Santi Cordero this week, who obviously he got 18 minutes off the bench in that game against the Stormers, but after such a brutal season for him, it'd be great to see him getting a start to to might cap off the season. Who knows? The season could last another game or so, but potentially not. So that is Friday evening, Leinster hosting Connacht. Saturday evening, then Munster hosting Ulster in their final regular season game. Munster just need a win of any kind to guarantee first place and home advantage for as long as they stay in the playoffs. I'll start on a bit of transfer news then. So the Antoine Frisch to Toulon news was confirmed last week, and Bernard, that seems to have opened up a little bit of budget for Munster to bring in a non-Irish qualified winger. Mike Prendergast said that they have scope to do it. I think they've got it signed off by the IRFU that they can bring in someone, and it looks like it's going to be Thaakir Abrahams of Lyon, who some people will remember from scoring 2 tries against Connacht in the Champions Cup in January. Other people will remember from him playing with the Sharks in the first 2 seasons of the URC as well. Mike Prendergast didn't necessarily confirm they were signing him, but they said there'll be news in the next few days, and he spoke fairly glowingly about Abrahams. So put 2 and 2 together yourself. I think you can get the answer to that one. What have you seen of him? What sort of a player is he, and what can Munster expect from him?
First of all, it's going to happen unless there's a last minute hiccup. He's
Mike wasn't really denying it yesterday when he was asked about
it. I think Lyon. I know some people in Lyon who are really upset to lose him. But that's the challenge now in France. If teams are short qualified GIF players in other positions, someone like him, becomes surplus to requirement just for numbers. It's not to do with his quality. Okay. He was excellent. And if you look at where he played this year, he played more games in the Champions Cup, which obviously doesn't count for GIF numbers. So they are, Lyon are tight on GIF, on non-GIF spots. So, but I think there's people in Lyon who would rather keep him and find someone else that maybe needs to leave. So that's a real good sign. You don't want to be, you want to be signing players that the club who have them really rate. So I think it'd be a good sign. I think he has a profile that's different than anything else that's in Ireland, in terms of his pace, his acceleration in particular, and his footwork. So, and I think Munster could do with a real pace man. Like their attack is brilliant, and it's but I just think having someone like him at the end of things will actually make it easier to score to line break. So if it gets done, which as I said, I think it's either done or very close to being done. I think it's a good move, and obviously it wouldn't be overly expensive either, which from an Irish province point of view is the market they're in at the moment, bar obviously the Snyman and the Barrett signings.
Yeah, no, that is good to hear around the GIF stuff, because I think there were some Munster fans who probably would have seen his stats this year and just been ever so slightly concerned about that he hadn't really been playing. I think he's kind of 12 games or so in all competitions. I can't remember, but it did jump out that he didn't seem to be in Leon's first team every week, and that probably explains it. That just it was a numbers game. They couldn't fit him in for GIF reasons.
Yeah, they have the Georgian winger. They have he's class, but he's GIF. So like that, that's the challenge in France now. Is there certain positions where like there's not that many? So for example, lock. There's a lot of non-GIF locks in France, and people. There's lots of good back three players, so who are GIF. So that's probably where he slipped up.
Johnny, moving it on to Munster against Ulster then this weekend. They're obviously in a great position, but just at the wrong time. You've Alex Nankerville, who's going to miss this weekend with an ankle injury, and I would say more than likely next week. Mike Prendergast didn't sound confident that he'd be back for a quarter final because of his injury. Antoine Frisch is carrying a bit of a niggle this week that they've had checked out. Again, they were saying they were a little bit hopeful, but they couldn't really make a call on it whether or not he'd be available this weekend. playoff hopes will be very, very dependent on having two players like that available for it. And like, what chance do you give Munster of having a deep run in the competition if they are without both Frisch and Nankivell potentially for the next two games? We don't obviously we don't really know, but do they have the depth there in the likes of Sean O'Brien and Rory Scannell to step up?
I think they do probably for the potentially for their quarter final. That is a home quarter final. That would hopefully they imagine that to get them over the line. But when they get deep into the competition, hopefully it's a home semi and potentially a home final. I think the center pairing of Nankivell and Frisch is an integral part of them going back to back. Just when they get deeper in the competition, that semi-final, final stage for them, because they've been leading lights in how they play. Their last game, Nankivell is such a strong carrier, but I think he showed the last night how good his passing game can be, particularly for Frisch's try. He's throwing those long balls over the top. And then, Frisch is probably seen as, more of a facilitator. That finish in itself was brilliant, showed really good, just footballing skills, chip through and regather. I think they are pivotal to Munster going back to back, just because they've been such a good pairing. And their quality, they're a center pairing that's really well balanced, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And you have options to do both, really good, strong defensively, a stereotypical old school 13 outside a really good, hard-nosed 12 that can play a bit of ball as well. So yeah, I just think I think they'll be okay this weekend and next weekend, but if they're to go back to back, I think they're really, really important.
It's Birch, it's remarkable how long this season has gone on. It was only in the last couple of days it got me thinking that I'm pretty sure this day 12 months ago we would have been doing our post URC final Munster are the champions podcast, and we still have the final round of the regular season, the entire playoffs, and an Ireland tour of South Africa still to come ahead of us over the next 6 or 7 weeks. But on Munster, they've been on this brilliant run in the URC over the last 5 months now. Haven't lost a game since New Year's Day. They've won all of those with a bonus point. All but one, sorry, with a bonus point. Okay, Champions Cup didn't go their way, but we were asking my Prendergast about this yesterday. Has the fact that they haven't been competing on two fronts, has that helped them over the last few weeks, where because of these Champions Cup breaks, you've had Munster have been able to play a block of 2 games and then have had a week off to reset, come back for another 2 games, a week off to reset, come back for this game, and then into the playoff run? And has that just been able to help them keep this momentum up over the last while, where a winning run like that if you're going week on week, is very, very difficult to maintain?
Yeah, look, okay, that's obviously the advantage of not being in the latter stages, that you can actually really go hard at a game, recover well, plan, get your scout and your plan done early, and then have a full week without any fatigue. So, and Munster have looked like a team who've managed that really well, and it like now they got to go 4 in a row to win it, but you wouldn't doubt them at the moment. Obviously, as long as they can get that home top 2 seed, I think it'd be brilliant for Munster. It'd be great for their fans who've obviously had to travel last year for the last 3 rounds, and to have to travel Northampton for the last 16 game of the European Cup, to have knockout rugby back in Thomond, would be brilliant for them, and also would give them a bit of a boost financially as well, which may come in handy down the road.
Yeah. So, and then to finish up on Ulster, so this game kicks off at 5:15. Ulster, their playoff spot is secured. They obviously don't know yet about Champions Cup. They're in a situation where by the time the game kicks off at Thomond Park on Saturday evening, they could actually be guaranteed in the Champions Cup. So they may not even need to get a single point out of it. They may need a win. We don't really know yet. I'm not really going to talk too much about those permutations though, because there's just a bit of news around Ulster. 2 signings in the last few days. Number one, Aidan Morgan, out half from the Hurricanes, joining next season. New Zealand born but Irish qualified. And as we know, they've needed an out half to bulk up the stocks with Billy Burns going to Munster. And secondly, then Jimmy Duffy joining up with Richie Murphy's coaching ticket as well, the ex-Connacht forwards coach, who's been in Australia for the last couple of years at the Western Force. Birch, first of all, I might talk about Aidan Morgan. Have you seen much of him? What do we know about him? I'm sure for a lot of Irish fans, he's a fairly unknown quantity.
He's kind of reminds me of Tyler Blindale. Back when he came to Munster, young, talented, kind of free spirited, 10 with lots of skill. Looked like he was going to break through in the Hurricanes quite early, but just hasn't really happened for him. I don't think that's a big issue. But obviously, once he was Irish qualified, the lure of Ireland or the lure of Europe was always going to be on his horizon. And some players wait till later in their career to take advantage of that. Some of them, they want to be All Blacks first. And I think back to James Lowe, his first year in Ireland, and he was quite. He wasn't obviously Irish qualified, but he wasn't adamant that he came to play for Ireland. He's just coming to have that experience. And whereas Aidan Morgan, obviously, I'm sure for the last 5-6 years at least, this has always been a potential option to come here. And Ulster would have needed a 10, and the opportunities to come, and obviously new coach, etc., a former 10 himself, Richie. So I think it's a good move for Ulster. I think as a fan you would want, an Andre Pollard or someone really experienced, but to get someone of his talent who's Irish qualified at probably the right price. Richie came out this week and said, "Look, we're not Man City. We have to cut our cloth." So I think it's a good coup for them to get him
in. Jimmy Duffy, then, Johnny, have you you would have played against teams coached by Jimmy? Have you encountered him personally much down the years? And I suppose just ultimately good to get another Irish coach onto the coaching ticket there, and an experienced head as well.
Yeah, I think he started off in the age grades and built up then through Connacht, and then I think he did the Irish youths very early on in his career. So it's great for an Irish coach to be seen to be to come back in and get one of the main for forwards coaching jobs. So I think it's great. Look, he's extremely experienced through Connacht, and obviously his time in Australia is going to stand to him. It's a different type of rugby. So that's going to be massive. You've got two not young but experienced Irish coaches at the helm up there now. Be interesting to see if they add anyone else to their ticket. They've both signed 2-year deals, so it looks like that they could be there for a while. You'd hope that they'd extend past that when things go well for them. So I think it's a really good signing, and it kind of steadies the ship from people didn't know what was going on, kind of even as close as kind of 3 weeks ago they were a bit unsure and whether Richie was staying or was he only doing a year. They have that stability now, and they've made a couple of signings. The squad know where they're going, know what they're doing, and it's I think it's good. It's been a good week for Ulster off the pitch.
Yeah, Birch, just to finish up on that point then, I do think in the last couple of weeks we've moved slightly from being worried about Ulster to being a little bit more excited about what's to come. I'm not saying excited in a God, they could be European champions in 2 years sort of way, but more that you can start to see now where the change is coming, and where these green shoots are emerging, where you've got new coaches coming in, you've got a couple of good young players coming through. You can see what the squad is going to look like next season. You can see what the coaching ticket is shaping up like. Who the personnel are involved, and it looks ultimately like they're in a good position to lock in a Champions Cup place for next season. I think we're starting to lean more on the optimistic side compared to pessimism from a few weeks ago.
Yeah, look, and that's what I suppose given clarity does, and also to be fair to Richie, results the result against Leinster was a massive result for Ulster. Yeah. And the Ulster fans left Ravenhill probably in as positive mood as they've been. They know it's not perfect. They know they don't have, a Rolls Royce squad, but they can actually see that there's now a bit of a plan and there's a change. And I think, this week announcing a 10 to add to their depth, and a young talented 10, and then obviously Jimmy Duffy come back, who's been vastly experienced and knows the league and knows Richie well, and will work alongside Rodney Grant. I think it's been a great month for Ulster, given where there was just that lack of certainty, and obviously change with new CEO, no coach, permanent coach. It's starting to look a lot better.
Yeah, it certainly is. So they're taking on Munster this Saturday evening, 5:15 kickoff, and then we will see who they're going up against in the playoffs then the following week. But that's it from this week's podcast. Thanks again to Johne and to Birch. Munster and Ulster live on RT2 and RT Player this Saturday evening, 5:15 p.m. kickoff. Live commentary as well on RT Radio 1's Saturday Sport. We will speak to you again soon on the RT Rugby podcast.